This is the Drake Insights Podcast, your weekly dose of cutting-edge senior living marketing insights. Join me, your host, Natasha Drake, for bold ideas, proven strategies, and inspiring stories straight from the experts. Tune in and let's conquer the senior living marketing landscape together. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Drake Insights Podcast. I'm your host, Natasha Drake from Drake Strategic. Let's get started. So on today's episode, I am joined by the fantastic Matt Reiners. I'm sure you all know him. You've seen him on LinkedIn. You've heard his podcast. And I'm so excited that he is coming and joining me on my podcast today. So welcome, Matt. Thanks for coming. He is Chief Growth Officer at Parasol Alliance and the host of the Connecting the Dots podcast. So welcome, Matt. Please introduce yourself if you wouldn't mind, to everybody.
Awesome. Well, Natasha, so excited to be here. I know you were just on my podcast, so I love this type of barter. Yeah, so Matt Reiners, as Natasha said, Chief Growth Officer at Parasol Alliance, helping to change the technology culture in senior living. My background, I've helped start two companies that have both led to acquisitions, one doing silent discos around the country, to another one, which was another hearing assistance play with senior living. So spent about the last 10 years in senior living and really fell in love with what Amber and the Parasol Alliance team was doing. So joined here a little less than a year ago.
Wow. So tell me a little bit more about your story. So you gave a little background, but you've been in senior living, though, this space for quite a while in a lot of different realms. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and then how that led you into AI? So today we're going to talk a little bit about AI because, as you know, it's growing, it's rampant. I think it's just really helpful for everyone to understand how to use it and work in daily life. So you've been in senior living. How did that then turn into your passion with AI?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in senior living for about 10 years. And I remember the first time I was introduced to ChatGPT. And, AI, right, it's been around for years. I think over the last few, it's kind of been more front and center and you hear something new every single week. From my point of view, I've always practiced this mentality of, how would a really lazy person do something? Or efficient, right? You can use lazy and efficient interchangeably, and just really saw the power that, using various platforms could help with my own personal productivity and really help those around me and the people that I was serving, and just allowed me to do more of quality work and just, kind of had this aha moment where I was like, holy moly, like I can just really continue to perform at a top level and using some of these tools to automate some of the mundane, elevate some of the meaningful. And it really just seems like it's the future to my perspective. Right. And I look at it as a tool and do believe the people that embrace it, use it, learn to run with it to whatever helps them succeed are going to be the ones that continue to set themselves apart.
Yeah, I agree. And when we spoke last, I know you've mentioned this a couple times in different talks you've done, but the different types of AI. And I, like you're just saying, I pretty much know ChatGPT. I know a lot of those types of tools, Gemini, things like that. But I know there's all different types. So can you dig in a little more for those that are new, to learning about this and maybe don't know as much outside of ChatGPT? Can you explain a little more about the different types and how, how it's already integrated really into our lives?
For sure. Yeah. So when people think of AI, right, they think of a humanoid robot, the Terminator, let's say, or ChatGPT, but really it's so much more, right? There's predictive AI that we all deal with, right? Like Amazon recommending products to us, right? They always tell the story about how Target started sending out direct mailers to someone because she was showing indications that she was pregnant before she knew she was pregnant, right? So there's Amazon that's doing that. There are fraud alerts from the bank, from some of these predictive things. If it starts to notice trends and then things go off some of those patterns, with computer vision, right? Like Face ID on your phone, right? That's AI, reading check deposits through a mobile deposit. That's some combination of AI. And then really, it's not just a buzzword, but it's really just deeply integrated into everything that we're doing, right? Like Google Maps, Waze, all these sorts of things have some component of AI into it. And I think once we kind of understand that we're already using this, it helps to make it a little bit less scary because AI isn't coming, right? It's been here. We just need to notice it and embrace it and use it to whatever helps set us up for success.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think I thought of some of those things as AI. Obviously, they are. You're right. It's like a buzzword now. I think it's we're calling things what AI, but it always has been here, just in a different form. And so I think now, though, that more people in their daily life are using it more so than organizations and large, places like that understand it better to that level. So tell me a little bit about, how people are using it now in 2025. Like what surprised you the most about how people are starting to use it now?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think, Harvard Business Review recently came out a couple of months ago of just like the top 10 ways people were using generative AI. And I think a lot of people, when they think of AI, they think it strictly in a professional sense, right? Like, how do I use this to help me with my job? How do I help this with coding, right? Like, I think that's kind of where people get like, oh, I don't want to use it for that, so I'm going to keep doing. But like the number one way people were using it was kind of like as almost a therapist, right? And the example that they use in some of the other parts of the country, there might be like one psychologist, psychiatrist to 10,000, 100,000 people. So people can start using it to help them with that sort of stuff. We've also seen people starting to use it for like companionship. But where I'm really surprised and like really excited about how do I use AI in my own personal life, right? It's almost becoming like a household COO. Yeah. For us at my house, it's helping to like manage meal plans, calendars. We've been using it to kind of like figure out, I've been using it for like different workouts based on the things that I have in my basement, my makeshift gym. So really trying to use it like that. And, I think too, or AI, a lot of people just assume it's, only big companies can use this, but it's really starting to become regular people that are hacking life with these tools. And some of the other ways I'm getting feedback on kind of like my investment portfolio or like, am I making sure I'm making my investments in the right place as I'm looking for retirement over the next 30 years, just trying to like map out some different scenarios. And, it's nice to kind of, I was just using it. I've been painting for the first time. So getting some like painting 101. So between like ChatGPT and YouTube, I feel like I'm an expert now.
I want to get back to that in a second, but I think you're right. I find that now when I'm searching for something or I'm looking for an answer, like you're saying, I find myself, I used to always, go to Google or go to whatever your search provider is. I find myself now, if I ask AI, actually you get a much better tailored response, answer, details, instructions. Like you don't have to keep searching and go to an article and then having to read through it. And I'm sorry for all my SEO experts. I know that's why they're having to integrate this right into their SEO platform because it's true. And so I've just started that recently. Like, oh, why am I Googling this? I should go into ChatGPT or whatever the right platform is for it to get more specific to me, how it's going to help me in really step-by-step instructions rather than having to read an article. So I think that's really interesting. That's a shift. I think a big shift of how people maybe were using search before and how they're using it now. So you talked about your daily life. Can we dig into that a little bit? I know you've got this 4-step framework for how to implement it, into your life. Can you walk us through that process?
So, when I go back to AI, really the mantra that I like to think about is, automating the mundane to elevate the meaningful. And I think any professional or even in your personal life have to deal with some of this BS, I'll call it, in case so we don't get flagged, that like, putting out fires, all these things that we have to deal with every single day or every single week, right? So the 4-step framework that I basically do is like, trying to figure out what are some of those mundane tasks that I'm dealing with, right? So like if I look at my personal life, grocery shopping is one of them, creating the grocery list, right? In my professional life, it's taking notes from some of my sales calls. It's like, figuring out how I'm breaking out projects. So really trying to figure out, document and writing those down, right? Like how much time do I think I spend per week doing X, Y, or Z? And then from there, really trying to figure out, so identify what you need, identify how long it takes. And then from there, I try to find like an AI tool, whether it's already pre-built or something that I might want to try and do, through ChatGPT or some of the agents out there, and trying to figure out like what makes the most sense for what I'm trying to solve for, right? And I don't think at this point there's a catch-all AI platform for everything and anything. So, and then trying to figure out that. And then, the last step is just iterating, right? Like AI is just not set it and forget it. You got to continue to like fine tune it, continue to make sure that it's working for you and making sure that it's helping you to, become the best version of yourself and really setting you up for success so you can spend more time on some of those meaningful activities.
So can you walk us through that? Because I know you've told me this a couple times about how, and you've done a presentation on this, about how much time you've saved specifically with AI. I think it was like 23 hours or something like that. Can you walk us through that and how many hours you saved and what you did to get to that?
Yeah, of course. So, and when I look at 23 hours, so I basically was looking at like per week, right? So assuming 40 hours in a week, I basically started going through and looking at all of my mundane tasks. So, and I'll just kind of walk you through them. So one of them, I've got ADHD and I always struggle on like what to prioritize and what to figure out. So I use this thing called Motion AI, which basically just integrates into my calendar where I'm able to then set up my projects, put that in the Motion AI. I assign a due date and I assign a level of priority to it. And then, how much time I think it's going to take me, right? And then it basically just schedules that on my calendar. So I am just showing up to work and basically being told on what I need to work on. Once I complete something, I just check the box. It considers it done, and then it just reworks my calendar to make sure that like I'm continuing to work on stuff. And then what's nice too with that, right? Like it still leaves it open on my calendar, and I'm always sending out like Calendly so people can like book time. If someone does book time over like one of those work sessions, it just basically reconfigures my calendar, blocks off that time, and then just adjusts that. And then it gives me alerts if things are kind of pacing towards being off task or it's going to miss the deadline. So I can then kind of readjust from there. I will say I need to be religious in terms of getting my projects in there, because if it's not in there, and there's a couple of ways that I've done that, whether it's through like voice memos. So I might be sitting in the sauna and I can kind of turn that on and like quickly get that captured. I can forward emails to my platform, or there's a couple of other ways that I can do that. So like, based on what, and before I would say I would probably take like, I don't know, anywhere from like hour and a half each day, just trying to like prioritize, right? Trying to like figure out what makes the most sense. And now that time based on, per week, I'm looking at about an hour total, right? I just get my projects in there, let it do the scheduling for me. So that's cut out a lot of time. Another thing that I use, so, meeting notes, right, for my CRM, doing follow-ups. So, there's a platform I call within Zoom called Read AI. There's other meeting recorder softwares out there. There's probably some better, some worse. I've just used Read just because, that was one of the first ones that I've used. So like what's nice with that, like I can do meeting notes and summaries, can go back to it. So it's been very helpful with like my sales calls, because I could then export that transcript, put it into my MattGPT, which I'll get to in a second. Basically put together notes on that. I can formulate email follow-ups from that. And then I find it also super helpful for some of my internal meetings, especially like my one-on-one with my boss, who's definitely a visionary. She's quick to make decisions, and that way I can kind of take some of her wording and then play around with it from there. So like, before I would say that on average an hour per day, right? So that's down to an hour now per week. So that's saving, considerable amount of time there. Another thing that I do, so I speak a lot on the conference circuit. I think, in the first half of the year, 10, 12 conferences, something like that, all require like original content. So a lot of time is being spent doing the research, doing all that sort of stuff for the PowerPoint. So now I'll use deep research on ChatGPT to get me citations, making sure that it's real stuff, right? And then I use a platform called Beautiful AI, which, I'm definitely not a designer, but it helps me to do all of that sort of stuff. So on average 5 hours per week. I have that down now to 2 hours per week. Still, it needs a level of customization and lining up and all that sort of stuff. Another platform that I use, so, as you had mentioned, I do a podcast. I've already have like 150 episodes. We used to do it out of Adobe Premiere Pro. Each episode, to do the full episode, all the social clips, all the transcripts, right, or the subtitles, probably 4 to 5 hours per episode. Now I use a platform called Riverside, which I can record right in there, do all the editing right in there. Now that per episode is down to like half hour, 45 minutes, right? So, and then, the last thing is just, ChatGPT, which we've created internally. I've got MattGPT, which is just basically a private GPT to myself. I've kind of put in the background or into the knowledge base, my voice. I've taken 8,000 LinkedIn messages that I've sent to people to identify my tonality, my level of wit or charisma or that lack thereof, level of professionalism. And then what I've started doing with MattGPT too, like there's websites out there that have got free PDFs to books. So like books relevant to my job, I can just go and upload in the knowledge base to kind of pull from. I can then put like books that I'm reading. I can take the summaries, put that in the knowledge base. So I basically have got this private Matt 2.0, let's call it. And then we've also created that for Parasol Alliance. We've basically just taken all the external copy, put that in there. So my marketing team and myself use that if we need to like spit out content that much faster, help to tell our story a little bit faster. So yeah, we've taken all of our website copy, all the transcripts that our founder and CEO has done to help kind of build that up. And, I would kind of look at like ChatGPT, right? For content creation, research, data organization, brainstorming, typically in the past 8 hours per week. Now that's about down to like 2 hours per week. I probably spend a little bit more time in that just for the back and forth with the dialogue. But, with all of that, it is saving probably 22, 23 hours per week of stuff that I need to get done.
Wow.
But now we're just automating that, right? And like, I look at AI as like, it's not something used to take an hour and get it down to zero. If you can get it down to an hour, down to like 5-10 minutes, right? Like that's a significant time saved.
Yeah, no. And I think some of those things you talked about, I've used some of them and some I haven't. I think the calendar thing and scheduling projects, that's huge. That's something that I really need to do. So I'm going to follow up with you on that. I think that's helpful because same thing. I have all these things I have to get done. What makes sense and how much time is it going to take? And actually using AI to schedule that for you is really cool. But I think also the thing you talked about was the MattGPT. I think that's a new thing that I've heard of too, how you really can customize your own ChatGPT. And I think that's something most people don't realize you can do. Now I know it, like you said, it takes a lot of work. You got to put a lot of information. You only get what you put in, right? So you have to put a lot of that in, but I think that's really interesting. I think that will help some people like me who also have a podcast, things like that, to help. Okay, what is my tone? What am I trying to say for the speaking engagements, for the podcast, for things like that? So that is super cool. I think, saving time saves money. And so, I think it kind of speaks for itself, but you have anything to say about, for companies in terms of ROI? Helping, I think it's important for companies that are listening to this or operators or, other organizations to realize that helping, not just from a personal life, from a professional standpoint, your team be able to use these tools saves you money, obviously. For every dollar spent, how many minutes do you get back, right? So do you have any more to say about that specifically in the investment?
Yeah, for sure. So I think too with like AI, you need to think about it in like one of two buckets, right? So you've got like the company version that everybody's kind of like implementing, which I do think is going to be more mid to long term, just because like everyone's tech appetite's a little bit different, right? And then there's this like idea of the AI augment itself to become like the best version of you, right? And like the quality of content or just like work you're putting out there. So, I know everyone always likes to talk about ROI. So in terms of like my personal AI ROI, so if I'm looking at about like 22 to 23 hours in a week saved, hours saved in a year, about 1,170 if we multiply it out by 52. What I'm paying right now for like all my AI platforms, and this will vary per person just because like some of these I've got legacy pricing. Right. So it's like 50% off what you're seeing there. I'm paying about $1,350 per year right now. So, if I look at that in terms of hours saved, so, what the math is mathing is saying that for every dollar spent that I like do on some sort of AI, I'm getting 52 minutes back to my workday.
Wow.
Right. So it's kind of speaks for itself in that capacity. And I'll tell you as, going from same industry, a different job, a different offering, different sort of like knowledge base, I would feel so much underwater if I did not have access to some of these tools and kind of like how I built them up over time.
Yeah. So you talk a little bit about, you kind of touched on this, but I don't know if you have any more to add, some of those mundane tasks that AI automation. Do you have any more to talk about on that? Or did you kind of go into all that? I'm just curious, is there anything else that people do? Like, I'm curious, what is the breadth, right, of AI? You may not know all of it, but what are the things that maybe we're not thinking about outside specifically of ChatGPT or asking questions or calendar scheduling? Is there anything else that is out there that I think could help people with some of those tasks?
So it depends on the person, right?
Yeah.
So like it's all about figuring out what the mundane things are. Mm-hmm. So it's like easier for me to speak to like a sales and marketing director because that's typically like what I'm eating and breathing and living every single day. But I know I've presented to like finance directors and there's so many just like cool AI tools out there to help with like month end of closing the books and stuff, right? So like that's why I try to suggest similar to that framework of just what is your mundane? Like, what are you spending a lot of time on? And then looking for opportunities to either automate it and, or outsource it. I mean, there's opportunities to do that as well. I know we're talking more about the AI stuff, but, it really depends on the person and what their workload and what they're getting bogged down with every single time.
Like I know when I talk to you, mine is data and reporting. And I think a lot of people in senior living do that. And And one of my episodes, I talked about how I think the data was that people use less than 25% of actually the data they have because it's very time consuming. All the different sources you're pulling it from, your CRM, your digital platforms, right? Your SEO, PPC platforms, and pulling it all together and then looking at the quality of those, how they converted, your conversion ratios. Like I do all that right now, a little automated in terms of pulling it from places into an Excel spreadsheet, but I know that I could probably save a lot more time if I use some kind of AI tool for that. So that's, an area where I see a need, and I'm sure, like, how does someone find this? I guess you just do a search and you can find these AI tools. Like, I don't know how I would even go about that process to find something like that.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think you bring up a great point. It reminds me, I recently had a chief growth officer from a senior living provider reach out to me. And, they're a management company. So they basically have inherited buildings with various levels of tech. They've got 5 different nurse call systems across their entire portfolio. They've got about 40 buildings. And was talking to him. He was like, hey, it'd be great if I could get this into a trend analysis. Cause right now I'm just seeing the emails every time they come in, but I'm not getting anything from there. So in that instance, what we basically did, and it was just me offering free guidance because, just trying to be a friend out there. I started asking ChatGPT. I was like, how would you attack this? This is kind of the problem I'm situated. This is kind of what the inflow of information is looking like. What would you suggest we do? And I think in these situations, especially with data, you got to make sure the data is clean, and you continue to hear these people talking about a data lake, right? Where this data can go in, it kind of serves as your source of truth. And then from there, it's going and updating this various systems. So in these situations, depending on what you're dealing with, Natasha, I always ask ChatGPT, right? Hey, I'm dealing with this problem. This is my vision. This is my goal. What do you suggest I go and check out? I mean, it's pretty good in terms of some of the outputs. And I've learned about new platforms from that. I've also just reached out to people in my network that I know that are using AI and just seeing how they're thinking about it. And then LinkedIn too. I try to follow some pretty cool people that are always sharing way more insights and know way more about it than myself.
I think the biggest thing, the summary of what you're saying is, well, first of all, you treat ChatGPT almost like a person, like a human. Same thing. I realized when I talk to it that way, of the way you would talk to someone you're asking for information from, it seems like it comes back better because you're asking it more naturally. You're being more honest in what you're looking for and what you're giving it. And that's been really helpful as well. But I think for people listening, think about, what are the things that are mundane, or what are the things that are wasting time? Number one. Number two is also things like the reports I'm talking about. Think of data. Think of things that when everyone that's listening to this, I know, does their quarterly reports, right? Does their financial review, does their budgeting season, right? Does their marketing planning. I'm just thinking of all of the people I know in the senior living space that do this. All of all the medical data that they're getting, and how much time they spend analyzing that, who's analyzing it, where are they exactly pulling the information from. I just think there's so much more opportunity, and it's here, like you're saying, it's available, that people aren't using. So reach out to Matt and learn how to use it, or ask GGP or MattGPT. What would you say to someone, like I'm mentioning, they're just hearing this for the first time, they're curious about it. A lot of people are intimidated by it. I mean, I was at first, and then I realized how easy it actually is once you get in there. What would you say to someone who's, a little curious but intimidated?
Yeah. So for the intimidated, there's a couple of different mantras saying, I always go back to mantras and saying, but really it's just being AI curious, right? Just I always like to use the analogy, you can't go to the gym one time and expect to be in great shape, right? You got to keep showing up, you got to keep working those muscles, you got to keep trying to understand where you can do that. And what I would also say is you don't need to code, you just need to converse. And really just start with what you're already doing, right? Writing, reading, organizing, and just, there's free options out there like ChatGPT. I pay for the $20 a month version, the best $20 I spend. Between that and Spotify, I'm trying to figure out where the best money I spend is. But just try for one prompt a day, right? Don't aim for magic, just aim for momentum. And really, to your point, it's having the smartest assistant that you could ever potentially have. And what you put in is what you're going to get out. So getting better at prompt writing is probably the easiest thing I can tell people. I think a lot of people go in there and will say, hey, generate an email to Shirley about X. It will give you that, but if you can get more better with your directions, it will just get more and more better to whatever you want it to do.
And one tip I've just figured out too, I don't know if you've done this, because you can upload, documents and things like that. Coming from agency world, I've written a ton of briefs. That's just, I know how to write a beautiful brief, and I like doing it. So I've gotten really good at kind of treating ChatGPT that way. Like, I'll write it out. We're like, here's my audience. Here's the purpose. Here's the direction. Here's what we're doing. Here's the result I want to get, right? And I break up each section. And I have found when I do that and I upload that, just for people who may have a hard time like typing it right in, that's really helpful. Or I'll upload, like you're saying, coordinating documents. Like, here's some coordinating creative that I want to use in this. Help me come up with how to say this better. And I am actually shocked by how good. Like, I was, first time I did it, I was like, let's see what this comes back with. And it was really good. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect and I'm going to slap it on a report. I mean, I definitely had to, make some adjustments and edit, but I just think if people can maybe think of it that way, because I'm sure you're writing reports. I'm sure you're writing a lot of that directive. And like you're saying, rather than giving it to someone to give it back, you're giving it to AI, ChatGPT, and it's incredible. It's like a personal assistant. It is, in a way, that some kind of assistant that's helping you with some of these things without having to pay that person for something like that.
For sure. And I think to your point, like, I always like to tell people too, like, so when I look at like kind of working with AI, right, like, you'll still want to have the original thought and the understanding, and putting that prompt through, it'll get you 80, 90, 95% of the way there, but you still need to have that human element at the end. Because there's all these things like AI hallucinations, which, like, there was lawyers that were fined $5,000 in New York, I think a couple of years ago, because they used ChatGPT. It gave them fake citations to cases, and they used it. And so, like, you just still need to have that human element. And a great example, even just yesterday, we had a call with someone who's interested in working with us, had it recorded, basically put it in and said, hey, can you do a follow-up to this question based on I recorded what I talked about with my boss, kind of like how we're going back and forth and how we wanted to respond. I asked ChatGPT to respond, and what it said was basically completely different from the transcript. I was like, no, please refer to the transcript where we talked about X, Y, and Z. And they're like, oh, thank you for calling that out. Yes. That was, so like, you just, like, you don't want to copy paste it and then just put it in there. Like, you still need, again, it's like an assistant. Like, you still want to have that final blessing before you put it out into the public or to the world, and just making sure that it's
and one thing I've seen, I don't know if you've seen this, Matt, but you also want it to look like it's from you. Like, I think it's great to have it be prompted, come out, but if you notice, what you get is the way ChatGPT likes to write is like a robot, like a computer. And what I mean by that is it uses like M dashes and N dashes, right, between words. Like, people don't typically type like that. Usually when we're writing, we have a phrase, we write a comma. We don't put an M dash, right, before the words. Or we don't have, a lot of times it has like emojis, right, or like icons and things like that. And I've seen that where people definitely copy and email it. And I'm like, you didn't write that. I know you didn't write that, So you still want to keep that personal element, but it's good for ideas and coming up with ways to say things. So I always say to people, just be careful, exactly copying it like you're saying. So next question is going to be like, what do you think of the future? Like, what is the next big thing coming, in AI, you think? Or do you know? I mean, can you plus in?
I feel like we're all just kind of making it up every single day as we go. When I look at the next kind of big thing, it's this idea of an AI agent, right? And I know one of the platforms I use for the calendar management, I talk about Motion, is starting to introduce like these AI assistants specific to the job function, right? So, again, how can you automate the mundane to really elevate the meaningful? And what I'm trying to build out personally is like, not necessarily like AI helping for business development, right? So not necessarily going and cold calling or sending out spam emails, but basically trying to identify these different prospect buckets, right? So like a good example for us, if there's a CEO that's new to a not-for-profit senior living company, they typically go in, kind of want to get a lay of the lands with technology. So what I'm trying to build out in the background is an AI agent. They'll kind of keep a pulse, whether on LinkedIn or some of the news articles that are coming out, identifying that. So putting frameworks in place to identify when that happens, brings that in, does research on the community, does research on the individual, starts to put a framework together where it would generate some, email copy for me. I'm going to approve it before it goes out, right? That's somewhat personalized, looks good, looks accurate. Also generate some other like selling activities in the background, whether it's through LinkedIn or like direct mail or something like that. So I almost think like the people that are really going to embrace this, such as yourself, myself, that kind of, have these mindsets. It's almost like creating these AI agent positive armies that kind of just helps to amplify what we're doing across the board. So I do think from a professional setting, like people can do that and really set themselves up for success. I also think from like a personal standpoint, right? Like I do think it's going to help like kind of fixing some of that BS that we all got to deal with, right? Like I'm still in the first year of a home. I'm still trying to figure out things of like what to do around the house. Like it's tough for me to Google something, and I'm getting way more explicit on like how to do certain things around here. So like I think there's opportunities to do that because it's going to become like essentially a second brain and not just a tool. And I think it's really going to move away from novelty to necessity. And I think the people that, again, embrace it and look at it as a tool and continue to fine tune their skills with it over time are going to be the ones that are going to continue to rise up, right? And the ones that are, hesitant to use it, the ones that are anti-using it, jobs are going to look very different in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you talked about a little bit about business development and, that side made me think of salespeople, in communities. And I'm realizing it's I did a sales episode where we talked about how archaic the sales process is in senior living. Now, some people aren't, but most are. And I was just thinking, I'm sure there is a way, a CRM should be able to do that itself. But if the CRM doesn't exist, there's got to be an AI tool that can pull that data and say, these are your top 10 leads to focus on. Here's why. Or, we're already doing marketing automation and things like that, but maybe it could pull it out for you. Like maybe there's a way to say it pulls all that information, like I'm saying for my reports, and it can say, these are the ones that are top of the funnel, middle funnel. It should be able to, based on notes, based on activities, right? Based on source, like you can it's not perfect, but for the mundane, think about the leads you're working, your whiteboard, right? And the ones you're working, and think about the ones that maybe you don't have as much time for. I just see some opportunity there to be able to, I'm sure it already exists, but I don't know. I just thought of that.
Yeah. So when you say that, like what I think of is like lead scoring, right? And I've helped to build out a few of those in CRM. So it's all based on like intention. So if they're visiting blog posts, if they're, filling out contact us forms, if they're attending webinars, like I always try to assume if someone's scoring higher in the lead, the familiarity with our brand is higher than that. That's negative or zero. So like there's a huge opportunity there. And then, as I think about AI as we continue to move forward, right? Like I've been talking a lot about efficiency in this, but I do think we're going to continue to ask is just how can AI make us more human, not just more efficient, right? Because I think that's what it's going to get back to is like, how do we show up as a human, interact as a human? So I always try to suggest to people like AI is going to change a lot. So people need to work on their soft skills, right? Like how do you hold a conversation with somebody? Like how do you like show up and listen and be a person first? And I think that's going to start to get lost. And again, we talk about using AI, but also the people that are working on being a human too will continue to elevate to the top as well.
Well, especially like you're saying, to let AI do those mundane tasks so you can be more human and present. That's the purpose. Like you're saying, the more time you have more time with your family, you have more time to be in person with your team and talk and have those strategic conversations where before you didn't have time because you're like, I got to get this report done. I got to work on this data. I don't have time to have those conversations. Hopefully it's helping you do that once you learn how to use it and what tool is best. So no, I agree completely. I want to end today with, can you leave us with some key takeaways? I just want to make sure we've talked about a lot of different things, some things you want people to remember specifically from this episode and or anything we forgot to talk about too.
Yeah, I would say, going back to the mantra of like automating the mundane, elevate the meaningful. I always try to figure out too of like, if I'm thinking through X, Y, or Z, like how could AI help in this situation, right? Like how can I lean into this just to like, again, make my life easier and really trying to like set that up for success. And, it isn't just tech, it's leverage, right? And like, again, the people that use it, embrace it, understand it, we'll brag in the future that we were able to, get out of college without using AI and stuff, but it's not only coming, it's here. And I'll tell you from a marketing and sales perspective, we're able to do now on a team of 1.5. I'm the half, and shout out Amanda on my team. And it's been really cool to see since, she wasn't using AI at all before. And then we started working together and now she's like crushing it. We're able to do what a team of 5 used to do in 1.5 and a little money spent on some of these AI tools.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you got to get behind it, especially like you're saying a lot with sales and marketing too, and targeting and all those things from the SEO perspective. You got to get behind it or work with someone like yourself or an agency or someone that does use those things. That's just going to propel you forward. So this is awesome. Thank you so much, Matt, for being on. I know you're everyone's AI guru, and I'm just grateful you came on today to chat with me a little bit about it. Appreciate you being on the podcast.
Yeah, and then last thought for you, Natasha, because it's funny, I'll go to conferences and people will call me like the AI guru or AI expert. I'm just making it up as I go and trying to keep my ear to the ground and trying to figure out what works for me, right? So anybody can do that. Yeah. Anybody can do that.
Get them started at least. So thanks again.
Always happy to be a resource.
Thanks for being on. I appreciate it. And thank you everybody for watching another episode of the Drake Insights podcast. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.
Real quick, if you enjoyed watching the podcast today, please follow me and subscribe so you're notified for the next podcast. And if you have any questions or want to talk after about anything that Drake Strategic can provide for you, please reach out to me, call me, email me, or visit our website at drakestrategic.com.